Hello, I'm your host, Karen Farley. I'm a documentation manager at Sylvan, and we'll be walking through the topics for today's Stratum Insight class, which are power user techniques, focusing on drilling, filtering, and navigation secrets while using Stratum.Viewer. The agenda today will be focused mainly on filtering and drilling, a little bit of navigation panel and view explorer techniques, but in the topic of filtering, we'll be looking at effective use of filtering management techniques, some shortcuts for some filtering that will save you time going forward so you don't have to reset up the filter every time you want to filter a view, and concepts for linking views via something called a drill to view. I'll demo the features and then open things up for questions and point out where you can find more resources on class topics. So I'll move through these slides fairly quickly, but in the recorded session, you'll be able to come back and look through these bullet points because I want to make sure we have a good amount of time to look at the product live. On the topic of filtering, I'll be showing a window that's used to manage all filter types, dimensions, levels, measures. I'll be showing you parameter groups, which is a way that you can prompt people for filtering choices before view results are returned to them when they run a view. I'll also be talking with you about dynamic user lists and how to use those with your filtering. For the filter window, we have a little, in the icon in the view toolbar area, you'll have a red icon where you can actually access that window. And it's used to add or edit multiple filters all at once, apply your changes all at once. There's an option to exclude or include or exclude designated members for your level filters, which is a nice shortcut to flipping back and forth of either showing or not showing a particular member. And you can also filter by attribute relationships, either from the grid or from that filter management window. The parameter groups that I mentioned are a way that you can predefine your filter options. This is prompting users for choices to get a more focused view. These parameters can be set up to be required or optional. You can do them for one or multiple levels in a view. And again, there's an include-exclude option built in, which is a nice opportunity for people to change what they want to see in their views. Parameter groups are nice because they reduce having to have multiple flavors of the same view or very similar view. For example, if one set of users always looks at region A, another looks at region B, you don't have to save two versions of the same view filtered for A and B. You can just present them with a parameter group choice, and then every time they run the view, they can pick their region of interest. And it also, having these parameter groups, saving your filter options ahead of time, reduces manual filter setup time. I'll show you this live, but this is an example of a parameter group window. A view prompt window gets presented to users when parameter groups are set up. So they'll make a selection of what they want to see in their view. That helps refine the view results before it's ran for them and returned to them to look at. And anytime when they're running the view, they can switch up the parameters and pick a different filter option, either by returning to that view prompt window that they saw when they first ran the view, or by using filter features in the grid or the filter manager window. I'll also talk about dynamic user list. So this is the window off to the right here as an example of a user list selection window from the grid or from a parameter. You have a list of members for levels that you save ahead of time, and then you can apply those to your view. Dynamic user lists are nice because when your database processes, conditions defined for your dynamic list are looked at and they're updated over time. So let's say you've set up a list for Illinois customer sold to dynamic, and a month from now you have new or less Illinois customer sold tos, your dynamic user list will update accordingly. Again, you use these to filter levels in your views, and you can combine with other filter options like the parameter groups, and I'll show you that in my demo. As well, there's a way to, when you're applying the user list as a filter to levels in your view, there's a change filter type option to look to bring that this selection window up for your user list. A couple more pieces of information here. I'll talk about drilling beyond the basics. So you're probably familiar with, there's links in the views, different levels and members where you can drill down to see more or other details, drilling back up to see your first level of summarization. There's a concept of drilling on member versus header. So drilling on product brand A, to go down to just see information on that particular product brand versus drilling on the product brand header, which will then bring all your product brand's information down and ripple through as you drill down to the next levels of detail in your view. Typically, I would suggest drilling on member, because if you have a large view and it's not set up to go page by page for a certain number of rows, you can bring back a lot of information all at once, which may not be as ideal. But I'll be focusing on advanced techniques. I'll show you the concept of a drill to view to help guide people through from one view to another, a shortcut for setting up a view filter by dragging a member in the grid up to the view filter, and you'll see me again using the navigation panel or the view explorer as I drag, drop, and drill and rearrange things in my view. Drill to views, as I think I just mentioned, so they link complementary views. You can assign a measure item in a view to link to another view, or you can assign the whole measure access to go to that view. So every single column of measure data in your view would be linked to another view. I think the first scenario is probably more commonly used, of picking a certain measure or two and having those go to a drill to view. And I'll show you again that shortcut for setting up a view filter, which you're dragging a member from a certain level up into the view filter, and that becomes the filter. Sometimes people choose to go and put levels up in the view filter as a way of adding or increasing your real estate in your grid area for other information. So if your division or distribution center warehouse doesn't have to be in the grid so you can see subtotaling for it, you can put up in the view filter and have a view filter parameter group so that it frees up space in the grid for other levels beyond those higher level summary levels. One more slide here, as you can see. I'll be showing a little bit of the navigation panel in View Explorer. There is options in both of those and in the grid to drag and drop. So I could hide Division F in this sample image I'm showing you. I'll show it live. Hide Division F if I don't want it to filter my view anymore. I could then drag it back into the view filter when I'm ready to have it filter the view again from View Explorer. Or I could drill down in to see more information by dragging, let's say, salesperson on a certain product brand. So I'll show you those samples as I move through the demo views that we're going to look at next. So let's go ahead and jump right into that. So I think we all should be able to see my browser. We are looking at my demo instance of Stratum.Viewer. And in this first view, we'll talk a little bit about the view filter, or the filter management window. So that's going to be an icon that'll be enabled here once I do a few things. So I'll just back up a bit here. You may already be familiar with using right-clicking in the grid on items in the grid, such as this attribute relationship, and picking Edit. I'm doing an attribute relationship, so let's say does not contain the word drop. Or you may be familiar with right-clicking on a measure such as the sales amount for the current year and doing a filter. I'm going to edit, let's say recursive top count of 5. I'm also going to drag, I'll do that shortcut I said before of just dragging division of G up into the view filter to get that out of the way. So in this case, I have a few different filters. I did them all manually from here. My recursive top count on product brand will be retained as I drill down. So if I go down to the next level, see for each of those top 5 brands, the top 5 products. I could change that to overall, and then it would just look at overall, what are my let's do that right now. Overall top account. Then overall, based on my last level drilled to, I'd be looking at the top 5 products overall, irrespective of what my top 5 brands were. These top 5 all belong to this one brand. So I've done this manually just to show you maybe what you're used to doing. And now you see this Manage Filters icon has been enabled for me because I've set up some filters. But I could just go ahead and set up all my filters from that window, or come back in here once I've done some manual setup from the grid and now edit things from this window. So you can see my grocery division filter on G. So here's that include exclude option. So if I had maybe a larger level would make more sense, but if I wanted to see all divisions except grocery division G, then I would switch this to exclude. or I could just take that filter away altogether. I could do the same with my top count here. I could edit it, or I could take it away altogether. And there is an option, which I'll show you in another view, the concept of adding a more complex filter to your rows. So maybe you want a couple conditions to filter your measure data in the view, and you could set that up from this spot. I'm going to move over to a different view to show you that concept. So I have this sales and returns by rep broker. I'm going to filter by, I'll do a complex filter over rows, and I'll go through my manager window, but I'm going to see sales over a certain amount and under a certain level of returns. And then I'll also probably do a filter on one of these attribute relationships again. So let's go into my manager window and do the more complex one first. I want to look at sales greater than 7 million. Let's type in the right amount of zeros here, or let's make 2 million. And I want to look at returns that are less than, let's say 500,000. So less than negative 500,000. Again, I think I've got the zeros correct there. So that one's in place. And then let's go over to one of my levels. Let's do product brand. I could also go down into one that's not visible yet and set up a filter. You can see what's not filtered by this information here. When there is a filter, as we saw before, things will be visible in red. So let's just pick drop. We'll pick these two items. Oops, there we go. And clear that for a minute. Do drop and sugar drop. You may see a different window when you're opening filtering on levels, so you could be taken directly to this advanced window. That's typically like a customer sold to or lot, something with a lot of members your admin may have set up, driving you right to this window first, and then you could search for terms versus the manual selection, and that would have been long description. I've already got them down here, but let's say I hadn't done that selection already. So I searched based on a certain attribute relationship. I got these two members. Let's add those all to my filter. And I'm going to pick exclude. So if I had left it at include, I'd only be seeing these two members. Now that it's exclude, I'll see everything except these two members. And let's see what that does to my view. So here's that axis filter. Here's the filter on product brand. And actually, I did not do it by, I thought I did it by attribute relationship. I could have, as a shortcut, kind of come down here and did the does not contain drop. But let's leave it as it was. Again, I could change the makeup of this by dragging up rep broker into the view filter. It's kind of a very limiting look at things, so let's bring that back over to up onto rows as the first level and drill back down. Let's see. I messed up something there. Bring that down there. Okay. That's what I need to do. I need to clear that. There we go. And now if I bring that up, I'll be looking at filtered by excluding the drop and having the sales over a certain amount and with returns under a certain amount. So I've been using the navigation panel for some things here. You could also, if you wanted to, you could kind of drag something from the navigation panel onto a member in your grid. Let's see if that returns much. A pretty pared down piece of information here, but that gives you an idea. And I'll show you this example again with another view of dragging things from the navigation panel or View Explorer into your view. Let's see if I've got one other piece. I think that covers everything with the concept of filtering, managing it through the filter window. I'm going to talk about drill to views here for a second before I go into the larger topic of parameter groups and dynamic user lists. So while we're looking at demo, I want to use this one, demo 2, you're going to see on this column here of sales amount links, and this links out to another view. So in this case, I set that up through View Explorer. So View Explorer, I mentioned in the slides, if you want to do a link to another view on every single measure in your view, you would work from properties for the axis. You would select yes, and then you could pick a view, look for a view, and pick it from your list and do OK. I'm not going to do that because I don't want one for every single column of information. I'm doing a more focused drill to view, and I set that up, and I'll drill there in a second so you can see that. I went to that measures property, I set yes as a drill down view, and then I picked the demo product view called family rolling week sales. So in this case, I'm going to be going from a view that looks at the current months to one that kind of breaks things down by week. And you'll notice as I click, I'm already at rep broker. Let's say I go rep broker 313. As I go over to that new view, things are going to be filtered by where I was at in this originating view, 313 rep broker division. If you don't want things so filtered as you go over to your other view, you could hide division or just go up to the division level. I'll show you what that means. Let's just go ahead and click here. So I was on rep broker 313, division F in my originating view, and so they filter my destination view. And as you can see, I've got a breakdown of sales by all these weeks, going from current week to 12 weeks back. As I said, if you are up further in your originating view, then there's less filtering effect as you move over to the other one, and that would look like something like this. So now I'm seeing all of my rep brokers. And of course, I could have simply cleared my filter on one of these levels instead of going back and rerunning that view. So that's one concept of drill to view. I also have another one that I want to show you, demo regional. That's this here. Again, I've set it up just to be on one of my measures and just to see like why would I want to go from one view to the other. So in this case, I've got a view where I'm looking at some open orders and some sales information. So I've clicked or set it up to go to a view where I now look at open orders by a week and a weekly review of sorts. So let's see what this one does. So my originating view had customer sold to, and region East is where I had clicked. So this customer sold to in that region now filter my destination view. And this gives me a breakdown looking at different weeks, past and present, rolling of open orders. Again, you could get rid of this level altogether if you wanted to, if you didn't care to have it filtering, but if you wanted to keep that filter in place, that's fine as well. So I've covered the view filter window, include, exclude, filter, options. I'd like to go into looking at parameter groups and that concept. And while I'm doing this, I'll show you the concept of setting up a dynamic user list. So in this view, we'll just, I think, stay right here. We'll come back to this view. I want to show you two views that already have parameter groups set up for them. And again, these are you get, when a parameter group is set up, you're presented with some choices to filter things before the view runs. You may see a filter request for one level, and there could be different ways to filter. So in this case, I've got an option to go into my select member window and pick something, or I can pick from a drop-down list. This is a short set of members. If it was product or lot, picking from a drop-down list might not be efficient for folks. So, but this gives you an idea of what people are presented with. So here's my filter selection, and I can go back anytime using this window again, or just using the other filter options that we looked at earlier, manually from the grid or up in the filter window to change things to a different, in this case, promotion. I've also got cases where, and you might come across, where you've got more than one level that you're asked to filter. So here I've got, in this view, I'm asked to pick a rep broker. And you'll notice in this window, you can also include and exclude. So if I want to see only Janice, leave it to include. Everyone except her, pick exclude. I'm also asked to filter the product category level. So I could do that. This one tells me I can leave things blank for all. So sometimes your parameters you have to pick, other times you don't have to. Let's just see what happens if I just leave that selection in place. So here's my results with my selection. Again, I can go back into that window and change things. Let's just do include Janice. And now I'm only looking at her. because I did include instead of exclude. So how do you set these up? I'll show you with a different view and also the dynamic user list concept, but view administrators can set up the parameter groups through View Explorer. And as you saw, there were two levels in play here. So each of them had their own parameter group with their own particular parameter. And there could be multiple, as you saw in the first view, where I could either have a selection via members and or a selection via user list or a drop-down list. So let's just go back to that original view, and I'll show you where you would see user list, as well as setting up that dynamic user list and a parameter group. In this view, I've got customer sold to. If I right click there, if I want to see are there user lists for me to filter by, I could then hover over the filter option and change filter type. And then I pick user list. In this case, yes, there are some user lists. I don't know if they're dynamic or static, but if I want to see what members are there before I apply it, I pick that list and then I click that arrow at the bottom, and now I can see what members I'm going to be getting if I pick this list. Let's just do that. So that, I believe, is a static user list, and we'll go over and check here in a minute. Let me just reset this view to its original state, but I do want to point out too, let's clear this. If you happen to just be going into your select members window, you could still get to that change filter type option. There's a more option where you can see the change filter type and then get into the user list review from here. So I've reset this view, but I'm going to hop over and set up a new user list for customer sold to, and this will be dynamic. So dynamic is helpful because let's say I'm going to, I'll show you as I go, but a dynamic user list is helpful because as conditions change over time, then the updated user list happens when your database processes, and you don't have to manually come back in and update your user list. So I'm going to set up a dynamic user list. Let's make it global, dynamic, Canadian or customer sold to Canada. My list. So I've given it some general properties. Now I need to tell it I want to look at customer sold to as my level. My dimension, hierarchy, and level in this case will all be customer sold to. And because it's dynamic, I have to define an expression. So let's do that. And there are examples. You can click this link to look at help file examples of how to set up these expressions. But I want to look at, as I said, customer sold to's from Canada. So I'm going to do equals Canada. So now when I create this list, whatever exists today as my Canadian customer sold to's will be in that list. If next month I have less or more, my list will be updated automatically for me when the database processes, and I won't have to come back and manually select those 5 new or 5 less Canadian customers. Let's see if I did this properly when I save it. Yes, so back down at the bottom, you'll see what currently today meets these conditions that I've defined for this list. I can go in and look at those members. I've got 4 customer sold to's that originate from or are in Canada. So I've created this list, I've saved it. Now let's use that. Again, I want to use it in this view. I could manually just apply that list, but I could also set up a parameter group so that people are prompted to either choose a list or manually select some customer sold to's on their own. So I'll do that, and it looks like we're running closer to we might run over a bit on today's time. No worries if you have to exit the session. You can find a recording of this on YouTube channel and the Sylvan customer website in the next day or two. So let's go in and set up that parameter group. I'm in View Explorer. I right click and I do add. Let's just say new group, customer sold to. It already went to customer sold to as my first level in the view, so that's what it defaulted to, but I could pick a different level or hierarchy. I'm going to not make these required, so people could bypass this prompt window once things are in place. So I've got the group. Now I need to define things that the user will see when they're selecting either members or that user list. Let's do the user list one first. User list. I want to make that a user list type. The prompt is what people see when they're presented with that window. So choose a user list to filter. Here too, you can set a default include or exclude option. You could pick a default list. In this case, if you wanted to, or some default members if you wanted to, so people just have to breeze through that window, but I'll leave that up to the user to pick what they want. And the display text, in this case, it could be a property of this level in terms of like long description, or it could be the value. Let's try long description and see what happens. I want to set up one more type of parameter. So if people don't want to pick by a list, they could pick by members. So this is my member selection. It's already defaulting to select members. Here's my prompt. Search for and pick sold tos. Leave it default of exclude. And I'm going to not, well, let's see what happens if I pick a default value. We'll pick, I want to make sure I pick one that has some values. Do that. So let's give them a default to look at, but they'll probably bypass that default and pick their own. So now you can see the result of what I just set up. I set up a parameter group for customer sold to. People can either pick via user list or search and pick via our selection window. Let's go ahead and do the user list option since I went through the trouble of setting one up. Here's that dynamic user list. Currently there's 4 that meet that criteria. Could change over time as I have more or less of those customers. Okay, you can see my selection, and let's apply that. So there is my dynamic user list in place, and I prompted people to pick it via that parameter group window. Let me save my changes here. I could go back in if I didn't want to be limited by this list. I could then go back into either this window, but I wanted to go into the parameter group window or the view prompt window. Search and pick for sold tos. I could leave it at that default, or I could go in and just pick some of my own. Let's just bump over to some United States customer sold tos and see what happens. There's my selection, and here's the results in my grid. So a lot of different ways to have efficiencies in your filtering, efficiencies for your users as well as yourself if you're setting things up. But parameter groups are a nice way to help if you've got a view with a lot of data in it to really focus people on what data they want to see each time they run the view versus just getting a mass of data that may or may not apply to what their needs are. I said I'd also talk a little bit more about drag and drop, navigation panel, and view explorer. Let me hop back to this other environment, and I'll just show you 2 more views and then wrap it up with questions. So here's demo budget figures by rep broker. As I said before in the slides, I could take something from this navigation panel, that's these rows and columns. If you don't happen to see this in your view, there's a toggle up in your view toolbar where you can pick and choose whether or not you're showing or hiding it. So again, I already showed you how you could drag a member of a level, in this case Omaha, up into create a view filter. You could also pick something from your navigation panel further in the drill path versus drilling all the way down there. Pick it, drag and drop it over to either rep broker, the header, or one of these detailed members. Let's do that. So it's not a filter that lives and stays with the view, but it's a means of filtering on the fly or focusing your data by drilling down to it. I also mentioned that as you take things in and out of the view, you could drag them back in from View Explorer. So let's hide that. And what I can do is still bring it back into play as need be. I can drag it from View Explorer over to the view filter, and you saw the numbers kind of changed as I did that. Let's hide that again. As I said, you could drag and drop something from View Explorer into the grid as well. So we're on product brand, rep broker. Let's rearrange this a bit so maybe it has a little more interest. Let me go to another view to do that. Demo sales, returns by broker. And so kind of a similar setup. I think I picked the same view there. But I've got a hidden, let's say I've got some hidden levels here, and I want to bring those into the view. So let's go ship to region and drop it on one of my rep brokers. This is a very narrow view of information here, but as I drill down, then I'll see more detail. Again, let's say I wanted to go by distribution warehouse instead. Let's go back up to rep broker. What happens if I do customer sold to? Let's drag that in. That's what happens if I drag it on a member. If I dragged it to the header, that'd be the same similar thing. I drill down, but on all the rep brokers. So I'm already there now that it's the second level in the view. So let's pick something different. So you see what happens when I drag and drop that way. I think I've covered all the major points that I wanted to share. So let me get back to my PowerPoint. So I wanted to open things up for question in a minute, but I've also put in contact information if you have questions after the fact. You will see a recording in this class on the Sylvan YouTube channel, as well as you can get to it from the Sylvan website. There's a resources, customer education section. You can also find more resources about these features or other features by going to the CustomerNet knowledge base, also accessible from the Sylvan website, either the customer login button or the resources CustomerNet login. Again, YouTube channel from Sylvan has a lot of great videos on these topics and others. Product online help from Stratum.Viewer gives you some of those examples that I pointed out. If you're building a dynamic user list, for example, or if you want to know more about that recursive versus overall counts, filtering for measure items, or the include-exclude topic. And we have a lot of other how-to and short videos sprinkled throughout the Sylvan website, CustomerNet, and the online help. Thank you for joining us today on this Insight class topic about drilling, filtering, and navigation techniques for power users, and have a great rest of your day.